Welcome back, everyone, to Calm Coding. This is your weekly briefing where we try to cut through the noise of the digital world and give you some clear, actionable cybersecurity intelligence. Our mission, as always, is pretty straightforward. Quickly break down the most critical security news from the past week. We're talking urgent patches, new attack methods, major breaches, basically the stuff you really need to know.
And this week, the threat landscape feels particularly sharp. We're seeing kind of a triple threat shaping up. You've got these critical vulnerabilities hitting corporate networks. Then there's the really fast rise of AI being used in social engineering, making phishing way more effective. And maybe the trickiest part, these super stealthy mobile banking Trojans that are just evolving incredibly quickly.
Absolutely. And just to give you a sense of scale here, we're talking about potentially 50,000 vulnerable firewalls out there. We've got Chinese state actors exploiting 0 days again, and malware that's, well, sophisticated enough to actually steal your money while your phone screen is soft. The stakes feel really high this week. Okay, let's unpack all this. Let's kick off with what feels like the biggest immediate fire drill this week. These two critical flaws in Cisco ASA and FTD devices. You know, the adaptive security appliance and the firewall threat defense systems. If you're running these, this is, well, it's basically a 5-alarm fire situation.
Right. And what's really concerning here isn't just like the number of devices potentially affected, but what these flaws let attackers do. We're talking unauthenticated remote code execution, RCE, which means, attackers can get full control of that firewall, that core piece of infrastructure, without needing any passwords, any credentials at all.
Wow. Okay, so the specific flaws, there are two, right? CVE-2025-20333, that's the critical one, a buffer overflow, like a 9.9 severity. And then its partner, CVE-2025-20362, which is medium severity but helps pull off the attack.
Exactly. That second one is a missing authorization bug.
Yeah.
And the potential scope it's frankly terrifying. We think around 50,000 Cisco firewalls connected to the internet are vulnerable right now globally. Shadow Server Foundation data from late September showed over 48,800 unpatched IPs. And it's heavily concentrated in some places.
Like the U.S., I saw.
Yeah, the U.S. is the most affected, over 19,600 instances reported there alone. It's so urgent that CISA put out an emergency directive that's ED-2503, basically telling federal agencies and everyone else, really, to patch immediately. Because, and this is key, there are no workarounds. Patching is the only fix.
Okay, so that really underscores something. It feels like state actors, organized cybercrime, they're really hammering perimeter devices now, like RCE on the firewall is the top prize.
That's a really good point. The firewall is the new front door, and they know it. If patching these wasn't already priority number one, well, these numbers should change that. And while we're on, urgent patching, we also need to talk about Broadcom. They just put out a fix for a high-severity VMware 0-day.
Ah, right, the VMware one, CVE-2025-41244. That's a local privilege escalation issue. Affects RDA operations and VMware tools.
That's the one, local privilege escalation, or LPE. And the thing is, when a fix like this drops, it kind of alerts everyone that a bug exists.
But in this case, the bad guys already knew, didn't they? It was already being exploited.
Precisely. That's what makes this one interesting. It was already being used as a 0-day, probably since late 2024. And we know who. UNC 5174, which is believed to be a Chinese state-sponsored group. They were using this bug to get higher privileges after they'd already found a way onto a virtual machine. They were dropping malicious files into places like TMP-HTTPD, standard sort of post-exploitation move.
And UNC 5174, they have a track record, right? Didn't they go after French targets before?
They do. A pretty aggressive one. Yeah, previously they hit French government agencies, telcos, finance companies, often leveraging flaws in Ivanti devices back then. So if you kind of connect the dots here, both the Cisco thing and this VMware example, they show these actors moving incredibly fast. They jump on known flaws for RCE or privilege escalation almost instantly, which just reinforces that point. Rapid, mandatory patching isn't just like best practice anymore. It's basically the only real defense against getting popped immediately.
Okay, so patch the perimeter, that's critical. But attackers are also getting much, much smarter about targeting the human element, right? Let's talk about social engineering. How's that evolving? I heard about this thing called MatrixPDF.
Yeah, MatrixPDF. So social engineering is always about making the bait look real, right? Making it convincing. Tools like MatrixPDF are scary because they make it super easy for even less skilled attackers to create really high-quality phishing attacks. It's basically a kit sold on the dark web, advertised as like an elite tool for making realistic fake PDFs.
And how does it work? Is it complicated?
The core mechanism is actually pretty simple, but very effective. It takes a regular PDF and embeds JavaScript actions into it. So when the victim opens the PDF or maybe clicks a button inside the PDF that looks legitimate, boom, that JavaScript runs automatically. And the kit has features to make it look convincing. It can blur the content to make it seem like a secure document you need to unlock. It's got a drag and drop interface for the attacker, and even features to try and bypass Gmail's filters. Turns a normal-looking document into a trap.
Wow. So it's weaponizing something we all use every single day, PDFs. So for you listening, what's the best defense against this kind of thing, besides just, being suspicious?
Well, that suspicion is key. Definitely avoid opening unsolicited PDF attachments, especially if they have weird prompts like open secure document or those blurry overlays that demand a click.
Yeah.
But technically, the most powerful thing you can do is go into your PDF reader settings, Adobe Acrobat, or whatever you use, and disable JavaScript execution. That single setting actually neutralizes the main attack vector that MatrixPDF relies on. It's a really effective technical control.
Good tip. Okay, now let's bring in the big accelerator here, artificial intelligence, AI. Microsoft apparently blocked a phishing campaign recently where the attackers actually use AI-generated code to build their lure. That sounds advanced.
It is and it isn't. So this specific campaign used an SVG file that's a type of image file, but disguised it to look like a PDF attachment. Classic trick. It was sent from email accounts that were already compromised, usually small businesses, to make it look more legit. Inside that SVG file was hidden code, usually with some kind of business theme, which would then reveal the actual malicious payload. Often it led victims through one of those CAPI-TCHA things, to seem legitimate, before hitting them with a fake login page to steal their credentials.
Okay, but hiding code in files isn't new. How did Microsoft know AI was involved? What was the giveaway?
That's where it gets interesting. Microsoft used their own AI tool, Security Copilot, to analyze it. And Copilot flagged specific things in the code that screamed generated by an LLM, a large language model. Things like really long descriptive names for functions and variables, like function_handle, source successful _authentication _callback. Humans usually don't write code like that. They use shorter names. Also, lots of repetitive structures, very modular code, and really generic comments explaining the code. It looked, as Microsoft put it, polished but not practical, functional, but not how a human developer would typically write it.
So the AI tools used to create the attacks are actually leaving behind these, digital fingerprints that other AI tools can spot.
Exactly. It's a fascinating arms race, isn't it?
Yeah.
AI is definitely making it easier for more attackers to craft sophisticated social engineering attacks. But at the same time, the way AI generates code often leaves these tells, these fingerprints. So defenders who also use AI tools have a new way to detect them. We're basically entering a phase of AI attacking AI, and defenders need to learn what these new AI-generated signatures look like.
All right, let's pivot now. Let's talk mogul threats. Specifically Android. There's a new piece of malware making waves called the Klopatra Trojan. Sounds ominous. Apparently built by a Turkish threat actor.
Yeah, Klopatra. And formidable is probably the right word for it. What really stands out is just how fast it's developing. It only popped up around March 2025, but researchers have already tracked 40 different versions of it since then, 40 iterations in just a few months. That signals really active development, constantly trying to improve it and evade detection.
40 versions, wow. Okay, how are people getting infected? Is it on the Google Play Store?
No, thankfully not on the official store. Users are being tricked into sideloading it, which means, installing it from outside the Play Store. It's being spread through fake websites, often promoting a dropper app called something like Mod Pro IPTV plus VPN. Looks like a utility, but it's just the installer for Klopatra. Once it's installed, its main goal is to trick the user into granting it accessibility services permissions. That's the really dangerous part.
Right, those permissions are powerful. Once it has accessibility services access, what can it actually do?
Pretty much anything. Total control, essentially.
Yeah.
It can steal your online banking login details, grab your cryptocurrency wallet information. It can even simulate screen taps to approve transactions without you knowing. It can read anything on your screen, capture logins. And here's the really creepy part. It can do all this even when your phone screen is turned off. It operates totally silently in the background. A genuine digital pickpocket. And we know it's already infected at least 3,000 devices, mainly across Europe so far.
Operating while the screen is off? That's terrifying. And I heard it has some pretty extreme stealth features, too, designed to make it hard for researchers to even analyze it.
Oh yeah, it's packed with anti-analysis tricks. Really sophisticated stuff. For example, it uses a legitimate software protection tool called Verbox. Verbox is normally used by companies to protect their own software from piracy or reverse engineering. But these guys are using it to wrap their malware in it. It makes it incredibly difficult and time-consuming for security researchers to unpack the code and see how it works.
So they're literally using defensive tools offensively.
Exactly. It also has multiple layers of anti-debugging code, trying to detect if a researcher is trying to step through the code line by line. It checks if it's running inside an emulator, which is a standard tool researchers use for safe analysis. It even has hard-coded names of common Android antivirus apps that it tries to disable or kill if it finds them running. This level of evasion, it tells you they're not just after a quick score. They're building this for long-term, persistent, high-value theft. They want it to stay hidden.
Okay, finally, let's touch on a high-profile breach, or potential breach, involving a major government entity. The U.S. Air Force is looking into a SharePoint issue.
That's right, a potentially serious situation. They're investigating a possible data breach, but this time it wasn't caused by, an external hack or a zero-day exploit. It seems to have been caused by an internal Microsoft SharePoint permissions misconfiguration. Basically, access controls weren't set up correctly. And that potentially exposed sensitive data, personally identifiable information, PII, and protected health information, PHI. Stuff that absolutely needs to be locked down tight.
PII and PHI exposure is always serious.
Yeah.
What was the immediate fallout from discovering this misconfiguration?
Well, the Air Force Personnel Center Directorate of Technology and Information sent out a notification. And because of the sensitive nature of PII and PHI possibly being exposed, they took a pretty drastic step. They blocked access to all USAF SharePoint sites, Air Force-wide. Just shut it all down temporarily. That kind of system-wide lockdown really tells you how seriously they're taking the potential exposure and the need to contain it immediately.
Yeah, that's a big move. And SharePoint. Unfortunately, it feels like we hear about SharePoint being a target fairly often, especially for state-sponsored groups.
It does, unfortunately. And this incident, even though it's about internal permissions this time, it still kind of highlights how fragile these big, complex collaboration systems can be when they're under constant threat pressure. We know that several Chinese-affiliated groups, the researchers call them Linen Typhoon, Violet Typhoon, Storm 2603, have a history of exploiting vulnerabilities in on-premises SharePoint servers. They've used past flaws to get authentication bypass or even remote code execution, hitting numerous U.S. federal agencies and other organizations around the world.
So, okay, tying this back, while the Cisco and Klopatra stories were about external attacks and mobile theft, this SharePoint situation really underlines a different but equally critical vulnerability. It's about the constant pressure from nation-states trying to get into critical government systems, sometimes through these collaboration platforms, and sometimes the way in isn't some complex zero-day, but just a simple misconfiguration of internal permissions. Shows the eyes everywhere, right? External defenses and internal data hygiene.
Absolutely. Vigilance has to be end-to-end. Hashtag outro.
Okay, so that was a lot to cover this week. State actors, AI phishing, stealthy trojans, internal breaches. What are the key takeaways for you, our listeners, as you try to stay secure out there?
Yeah, let's boil it down. Takeaway number one, and we keep saying it, patching is absolutely non-negotiable, and you have got to be fast. Those 50,000 Cisco firewalls need patching now. If you use VMware, get that privilege escalation flaw fixed immediately. Assume the attackers are already scanning for these vulnerabilities. They see your perimeter defenses as easy targets if unpatched.
Right. Takeaway number two, phishing is getting an AI makeover. Be extra suspicious of any unsolicited documents, especially PDFs asking you to click things, and seriously consider disabling JavaScript in your PDF reader. Also, make sure your security tools are looking for those weird, polished but not practical signs of AI-generated code.
Good points. And number three, mobile vigilance is crucial. Be incredibly careful about installing apps from anywhere except the official app stores. Watch out for things disguised as utilities, like that fake VPN app. And never grant those powerful accessibility services permissions unless you are 100% certain you trust the app and the developer. The speed Klopatra is evolving at shows that mobile threats are not slowing down.
Definitely. Okay, and maybe one final thought to leave you with. Something to chew on this week. When you see how quickly threat actors like UNC 5174 are weaponizing vulnerabilities, or how the Klopatra team is churning out 40 versions in a few months, it makes you wonder, right? Is the speed of our defense, our patching cycles, is it ever actually fast enough to truly get ahead of the next wave of 0 days and sophisticated attacks? Or are we kind of stuck in this endless race where the attackers always seem to have a head start? Something to think about as you're securing your systems this week.
That's a heavy question, but a really important one. Definitely food for thought.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's Calm Coding. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week with the latest from the digital front lines. Stay safe out there.